All right, let's talk about something that's been haunting the darker corners of the Imperium for millennia. A name whispered in the minds of psychers seconds before they burst into flame, etched in blood beneath the altars of forgotten shrine worlds, and buried deep in inquisitorial vaults marked to be burned. I'm talking about the cults of the Astral Knives. Now, this isn't just another heretical sect groveling at the feet of the dark gods. No, these are Imperial citizens, priests, scribes, even battle-scarred veterans who believe truly and fervently that the only path to salvation lies in offering up their souls to ravenous things that stalk the immaterium. Not to Khorne or Slaanesh or any of the usual suspects, but to predators far older and far more silent. Things that don't need worship, things that watch. And what chills me to the bone, this cult isn't outside the Imperium. It's within, in temples that once bore the Emperor's name, among orders that wear the Aquila on their chest, in the mouths of missionaries who preach hope, but whose dreams are filled with gnashing teeth and the flensing of stars. What drives a man of faith to slit his own throat and offer the blood not to him on Terra, but to something beyond language? What whispers thread their way through warp storms and sunken tombs to seed this nightmare into the hearts of the pious? And why, despite centuries of purges, do the Astral Knives still draw breath in the dark corners of Holy Terra itself? This isn't just heresy. It's something else. Something worse. And if you really want to understand the Astral Knives, you'll need to forget everything you think you know about chaos, devotion, and the line between predator and prey. So, where did they come from? Let's start peeling back the veil. If you start digging into the origin of the cults of the Astral Knives, the first thing you'll notice is how little there actually is in the official records. The Mechanicus archives don't mention them, not openly. The Ecclesiarchy treats the subject like a contagious disease, and even the Inquisition, which usually leaves nothing undocumented, seems to lose entire case files when it comes to this sect. But there are whispers. There are fragments. Enough to stitch together a shape, and that shape is deeply unsettling. The most accepted theory among those of us who obsess over these kinds of things is that the cult didn't begin as a cult at all. It started as a misinterpretation, or maybe a revelation, depending on your perspective. During the dark age of technology, when humanity had stretched itself like a neural network across the stars, there were sects that experimented with things we'd now call forbidden. Psychoreactive machinery, warp-emotive AI, interfaces between human minds and the immaterium itself. Some say the Astral Knives began as a result of one of those early neural feedback systems gone wrong, when a machine priest gazed too long into the warp through his synthetic mind and saw something that looked back. That vision became a gospel, but that's just one thread. Others trace their roots to the religious fringes of early colonists who were cut off from Terra during the Old Night. These isolated worlds, surrounded by warp storms and infested with xeno threats, often bred strange survivalist faiths. On some of them, survival was tied to rituals of bloodletting and sacrifice that eerily resemble modern astral knife practices. Imagine a desperate human settlement, haunted by invisible predators that only calmed when the people shed their own blood in specific patterns. Those rituals may have been the first instinctual responses to a warp predator's presence, acts of appeasement that later solidified into theology. The truly spine-chilling part is how these disconnected origins seem to converge on the same symbols. The knife, always drawn with the tip facing the heart. The starfield diagrams etched into flesh. The whispering void that promises release not in death, but in erasure. And the concept of the hunter, not a chaos god, but something older and colder, without desire, only instinct. There's a recovered fragment from an Exodite ruin, predating the Imperium, that speaks of the pale-mouthed stars and knives that walk between dreams. It's not Imperial, but some fanatics believe it's linked, that humanity isn't the first species to encounter these beings, and definitely not the first to worship them. The idea that other races have knelt before the same predators sends shivers down my spine. What does that say about the warp? That it's filled not just with the chaos we've named, but with nameless things that drink reverence and bleed civilizations dry. Another theory floating around among rogue inquisitors is that the cult was born within the ecclesiarchy itself, as a sanctioned sect dedicated to hunting down demons using the principles of mirroring and sympathetic death. The idea was that to destroy a creature of the warp, you had to emulate it, think like it, act like it. Over time, the hunters became the hunted. They adopted too many of the predator's traits. Eventually, they stopped fighting the warp beasts and started worshipping them. You can almost see the tragic poetry in that. The loyal servant slowly seduced by the methodology of the monster. There's also the strange persistence of the cult's presence on shrine worlds. These are places supposed to be bastions of the Emperor's light, yet time and time again, we find the telltale signs, hidden catacombs beneath the grand cathedrals, murals that depict the Emperor not as a man, but as an empty crown floating in space, knives embedded in prayer altars, always angled toward the stars. It's as if the cult incubated right in the womb of imperial faith, a tumor grown out of too much purity, too much fear of the unknown. I can't stress enough how different this cult feels compared to the others. Chaos cults, for all their grotesque heresy, are still grounded in some perverse logic. They want power, or pleasure, or transformation. But the astral knives? They want dissolution. They want to vanish, to be devoured. Their gods are not grand schemers or bloody conquerors, they're hunters. And to be hunted, truly hunted, is to be seen in your most naked sacred form. I think that's why the cult never truly dies, because it doesn't offer anything, not in the traditional sense. It strips you of purpose, of ego, of identity, and leaves you clean in the eyes of the predator. For some people, especially in a galaxy this cruel, that's a comfort, a holy surrender, an ending. But before we dive into the madness of what they believe, we need to understand how they've survived this long, and how they organize themselves when no two cells seem to be exactly the same. If you ever manage to peel back the veil and glimpse how the astral knives are structured, you'll find something that looks more like an ecosystem than a hierarchy. It's not like a traditional cult where there's one prophet barking orders from on high and a congregation kneeling in the dust. This thing breathes, it shifts, it evolves with an intelligence that feels eerily predatory. At the top, if you can even call it a top, are the so-called sharp seers. They don't wear crowns or sit on thrones. Most of them are blind, intentionally so, having offered their sight in early adulthood as a gift to the Watchers Between Stars. But don't let that fool you. They see in other ways. They speak only when the stars align, and when they do, their words come in fragments, riddles, directions, locations, not commands, directions, as if they're relaying instructions from something else, something distant, something that doesn't speak in language as we know it. Below them are the carvers. These are the ones who carry out the will of the cult. But again, it's not military. It's surgical. Each carver is trained in anatomy, in suffering, in the language of blood. They interpret the seer's visions and turn them into ritual. Their victims are often willing, sometimes high-ranking Imperials who've secretly joined the cult and offered themselves to be unwoven. But when they're not volunteers, the carvers are still methodical. It's never a massacre. It's art, intentional, clean, meaningful. Every slash is calculated. Every drop of blood lands where it must. It's terrifying how devoted they are to the precision of it all. And then you have the Hollowed. These are the followers who've been touched by the warp. Infected, you might say. But it's not possession like you'd see with a demon host. It's more like erosion. Over time, their personalities dissolve. They start repeating fragments of the seer's prophecies. They speak in stars and knife patterns. Their dreams leak into waking life. Many have their tongues cut out to stop the infection from spreading. though others believe the silence only deepens their communion with the predators they worship. What's especially disturbing is the psychological profile of these people. This isn't the usual chaos-worshipping madness. The astral knives are calm, serene even. They don't scream in worship or tear their eyes out in ecstasy. They meditate. They pray in complete stillness. And they believe with chilling certainty that everything they do is part of a larger pattern, something etched into the warp itself. If one of them is captured, they don't resist. They don't plead. They just smile, whisper a few words about the moment drawing near, and wait for the inevitable end. Sometimes they die with their heartbeats perfectly synchronized. It's not hysteria. It's faith. The Sharpseers often speak of the astral prophecies, maps of fate inscribed in blood, visible only when lit by starlight reflected off sanctified blades. I know, that sounds like heretical poetry, but there are inquisitorial reports that mention finding flayed skins arranged in precise astronomical patterns across cathedral floors. The coordinates matched known warp anomalies. It's not just metaphor, they're literally reading futures in flesh. One of the eeriest aspects of the cult structure is how decentralized it is. You can have a fully operational cell of astral knives on an agri world in the eastern fringe and another on a hive world in Segmentum Solar, and neither knows the other exists. And yet, when the moment comes, when a prophecy is fulfilled or a predator draws near, they act in synchrony, without signal, without command. It's like watching a flock of birds change direction mid-flight. No leader, just instinct. The thing that gets me the most is how many of them used to be Imperial faithful. These aren't fringe mutants or desperate scum. Many were Ministorum clerics, shipboard chaplains, or shrine world penitents. People who had deep, devout faith, and then, at some point, saw something, heard something, and everything broke. Or maybe it clicked. That's the most terrifying possibility, that to them, it didn't feel like falling. It felt like waking up. There's a theory I read on an underground archive once, written by a disgraced Lex mechanic turned heretic. He believed the entire cult functions like a neuron in a galaxy-spanning brain, the worshippers as dendrites, the rituals as impulses, the Sharpseers as synapses. And the warp predator they serve? It's the brain, the central awareness. And every act of worship is just another flicker of thought in something far, far bigger than we can imagine. And that's why this isn't just some fringe madness. It's a system, a living organism of faith and ritual, fear and stillness, blood and silence. If you think that's disturbing, wait until you learn about what they do with all that structure, their ceremonies, their sacred blades, and the awful art of offering souls to those waiting beyond the veil. If there's one thing that sets the cults of the astral knives apart from the sea of madness that is the wider galaxy, it's their symbols, their language of ritual, pain, and silence. The moment you see their marks, you might not understand it, but deep in your gut, something shifts. You recognize a kind of wrongness, a pattern that shouldn't exist. They carve their messages into flesh, into stone, into the very air with a kind of reverence that makes even hardened inquisitorial agents hesitate. And when you look closer, you realize it's not just symbolism, it's summoning. Their primary icon is, unsurprisingly, the knife, but it's not just any blade. It's always curved inward, the tip turned toward the wielder, toward the heart, a symbol of offering, of self-directed sacrifice. Most of their knives are ritual pieces, forged from black adamantine or scavenged star metal. Some even whisper that a few are made from crystallized warp flesh, whatever that means. The blades are never dull. They're kept sharper than surgical tools, not just for effectiveness, but as part of their creed. The sharper the blade, the clearer the message. They believe dull blades insult the Watchers. Their bodies are maps. Followers of the cult inscribe themselves with long, winding scars, many self-inflicted, others carved by their masters. These are not random mutilations. They're deliberate, precise. The positioning corresponds to star charts, warp routes, even echo frequencies heard only by psychers during deep trance states. Some claim the scars shift slightly during rituals, forming temporary glyphs readable only to the blind sharpseers. Others say the scars bleed at certain moments, unprovoked, as if something beyond the veil is watching and responding. One of the most disturbing things I ever saw was a Pict capture smuggled out of a shrine world in Ultima Segmentum. It showed a group of cultists kneeling in concentric rings around a central figure, tall, gaunt, robed in torn priestly vestments. His eyes were sewn shut, yet he stood motionless in a beam of starlight filtered through stained glass. No one spoke. They just breathed in unison. Then, slowly, they began cutting into their arms, letting the blood drip onto the floor in exact geometric shapes. After maybe 10 minutes of silence, the central figure began to hum, low, resonant, not quite human. The Pict recording ended there, but the next file showed the chamber empty, save for the blood on the floor and the mark of a warped 8-point star etched into the stone where the leader had stood. The creepy part? That wasn't the Chaos Star. It had one of the points missing. They believe in presence through absence. That's why so many of their rituals are performed in places of spiritual void, desanctified temples, burnt libraries, or abandoned catacombs where the Emperor's light has long since gone dim. They don't chant praises. They whisper, or they stay utterly silent. In fact, silence itself is sacred. They say that in true silence, the predators draw closer, curious. Some ceremonies even involve weeks of preparation where not a single word is spoken. Followers communicate through gesture, eye contact, or blood trails left like breadcrumbs. In that stillness, the barrier between real space and the warp thins, and that's the whole point. Every ritual serves a dual function, an act of devotion and a signal flare into the immaterium. When they carve a symbol into stone, they're writing a name. When they chant with blades pressed against their tongues, they're broadcasting, they're calling, and they believe that every drop of blood shed in their rites resonates through the warp like a scent trail for the predators they revere. Not just any predator, specific ones that have tasted that kind of offering before. It's not summoning like demons exactly. It's more like baiting a trap or lighting a beacon, except they don't want to trap the beast. They want to feed it. One of the most haunting rituals is known as the Knife Star. It's only performed during celestial alignments when certain stars form a pattern visible from a specific shrine world. During this event, cultists lie on stone altars arranged in a spiral formation, each one reciting a single syllable in a dead tongue older than High Gothic. As they chant, they drive small ritual knives into their own hearts, one by one, precisely timed to match a cadence known only to the sharpseers. The final death releases a psychic pulse that echoes through the warp, and according to some surviving transcripts, it always gets answered. Something always whispers back. And yet, despite the horror of it all, there's an elegance to their rites. Everything is deliberate, nothing is wasted. Even the blood is collected and preserved in urns engraved with symbols that flicker under warp light. These urns are then buried in specific formations across worlds. Some believe they serve as anchors, psychic landing pads for the predators they serve. Others think they're meant to prepare the planet itself for consumption, like seasoning the meat before the feast. There's a chilling consistency to how these symbols and rituals appear across distant systems, sometimes centuries apart. That's what convinced me that this isn't just a loose cult with a shared ideology. It's a network, a web, and it's pulling threads across time and space, working towards something we haven't even begun to comprehend. Maybe the symbols aren't just sacred, they're instructions. And maybe one day, when enough of them are complete, we'll see the full shape. I'm just not sure we'll survive what it means. The first time I heard someone seriously ask, "Who do the Astral Knives worship?" I laughed. I assumed the answer was obvious. Some forgotten demon prince, maybe a lesser-known servant of Tzeentch or Slanesh, something old and obscure. But the more I looked into it, the more uncomfortable I became. Because the truth is, nobody really knows. And that's not just because the cult is secretive. It's because even they don't give their god, or gods, a name. There are no icons beyond the knives, no statues, no personified visions, only descriptions that feel more like sensations than theology. In most accounts, the entity, or entities, are referred to only as the predators beyond. Not lords, not saviors, just predators. It's a word that strips away comfort and forces you to accept one simple relationship, hunter and hunted. And here's the horrifying part. The cultists don't see themselves as victims in that dynamic. They see themselves as chosen prey, a kind of sacred offering, the apex of hunted flesh. They believe that being consumed by these things is the highest form of purpose, that annihilation, complete and unremembered, is the only true transcendence. The descriptions are maddening in their ambiguity. Some speak of eyes in the void, unblinking and vast, that see through both soul and shadow. Others describe sound, clicking like teeth tapping in hunger, echoing across the warp without direction or source. And there are the dreams. So many cultists claim to have been called through dreams where something vast swims just beneath the skin of reality, trailing serrated shadows and a hunger so deep it eclipses meaning. It's not a voice, it's a pressure, a gravitational pull of attention so immense it scrapes sanity away like moss off stone. One theory, popular among the more radical inquisitors, is that these aren't demons in the traditional sense. They're something older, proto-warp entities that never aligned with the major chaos powers, beings that evolved in the immaterium long before emotion gave birth to the gods of chaos. Some suggest they're the psychic remnants of dead galaxies, ancient predators formed from forgotten screams. Others think they're simply native to the deepest parts of the warp, regions so far from real space that even demons fear to tread. The Astral Knives believe these things didn't fall from grace. They were never part of the divine order to begin with. There's even a fringe theory that what they worship aren't singular entities at all, but aspects of the warp's natural ecosystem. Predators, yes, but like animals in the real world, with territory, mating habits, even instinctual rituals. The Astral Knives, under this view, are less a religion and more of a symbiotic species, offering blood and thought in exchange for attention. Protection, maybe. Or just the mercy of being eaten last. What fascinates me most is that in every cult cell we've uncovered, no matter the world or the era, their descriptions of the predators always contain the same element. The knives. Not metaphorical ones. Actual blades, spoken of as extensions of the predator's will. Some even believe that the knives they carry are fragments of these warp beasts, shards left behind after a feeding, grown into material form through sheer psychic weight. And there's consistency in that belief. The cultists don't worship the knife as a symbol. They see it as a limb, as if every ritual cut is the predator moving through them. It's invasive, intimate, horrifying. There's this particularly disturbing story from a forgotten moon near the Maelstrom. A lone astropath survived a warp storm and was found half-mad, bleeding from hundreds of shallow cuts. He kept repeating the same phrase. It has no face, it only opens. When asked what he meant, he said the predator didn't have a will, didn't speak, it just opened things. Flesh, minds, realities. And behind every opened thing was another hunger. That account shook me more than anything else, because the Astral Knives often speak of becoming hollowed in their texts. Not possessed, not transformed, opened. Of course, some believe this is all just a sophisticated cover for a renegade chaos cult, that the entity they worship is really just a masked form of Slanesh, or perhaps an obscure demon prince. But that theory doesn't hold when you start comparing doctrine. There's no ecstasy, no obsession with sensation or pride or desire, no schemes, no trickery, only stillness, offering, and the cold clarity of being seen by something that doesn't care about you and never will. The more optimistic scholars suggest that perhaps these predators are not malevolent in the traditional sense, that they are part of some natural warp balance we simply don't understand. that maybe the astral knives are doing something necessary, acting as spiritual recyclers, preventing emotional psychic buildup by offering controlled sacrifices. But those are fringe thinkers. Most of us, when we stare too long at what the cult worships, come to the same conclusion. It is not a god. It is not a demon. It is hunger given form. I think that's why the astral knives frighten me more than any other sect, because they don't crave power or unity or enlightenment. They crave to be devoured, and in their minds, that's not the end. It's the answer. The knife cuts, the predator feeds, and nothing else matters. The connection between the astral knives and the predators they worship isn't like the pacts made with chaos gods. There are no deals struck in the warp, no twisted bargains sealed with blood and power. It's more like resonance, like a frequency being matched, a signal that reaches something lurking just on the other side of perception. And once that connection is made, it doesn't need words. It's raw, instinctual, almost biological. Their rituals of contact are nothing short of terrifying in their stillness. Most people imagine heretical rites as loud, violent, chaotic affairs, screaming cultists, blazing sigils, reality ripping apart at the seams. But the astral knives are quiet. Their ceremonies are cold and precise, often conducted in complete silence or accompanied only by a low hum produced collectively by the congregation. This hum isn't random. It's tuned, literally calibrated by psychers and mathematicians within the cult to match a psychic vibration they believe attracts their predator. The process begins with isolation. The chosen vessel, usually a cultist who has reached a specific point of mental and physical erosion, is starved of sensory input for several days. No light, no sound, no touch. They're wrapped in tight shrouds of null fabric, suspended in fluid chambers, left alone with only the echo of their own heartbeat. When the ceremony begins, they're brought into a ritual space carefully constructed to reflect certain warp geometries, rooms that aren't shaped by human architectural logic, but by mathematical models derived from patterns found in warp storm anomalies. Once placed at the center, the vessel is surrounded by the other cultists who begin synchronizing their thoughts. Yes, literally. The astral knives train in deep meditative states, developing a sort of psychic mimicry. When done correctly, they can link their emotions together into a unified field of intention. It's like a psychic chant, no sound, but all minds beating in the same rhythm. This field is directed toward the vessel, flooding them with focused will, stripping away their last defenses until they're cracked open like a shell. And through that opening, the predator looks in. It's called the glance. And they say it's the most sacred moment of all. Not possession, not communion, just attention. The predator becomes aware of the vessel for a moment and brushes against their soul. It leaves no words, no promises, just a mark, a scar that can never be seen, only felt. Those who survive the glance are considered blessed. They become something other than human. Their minds don't function the same way anymore. They begin speaking in disjointed phrases, recounting star positions no one else can see, or predicting events that haven't yet unfolded. Some go mad. Others simply vanish, walking into the night and never returning. The cult believes they're following the scent of the predator, called into the void like moths to a silent, blood-stained flame. There are cases, documented by the way, of individuals who have been subjected to such rituals and exhibited sudden psychic abilities. But these powers come at a cost. The most consistent symptom is what's been dubbed astral infection. It's not an illness in the traditional sense, it's a spiritual corrosion. Victims begin to lose their sense of identity. Their dreams become increasingly vivid, filled with labyrinthine corridors made of bone and lightless skies filled with slithering stars. Their blood tests start showing impossible anomalies, particles that resonate with low-frequency warp echoes, unexplainable by any scientific model. And then there's the matter of shadows. That's the part that keeps me up at night. Witnesses have spoken of shadows behaving incorrectly around these people, moving against light, splitting when they shouldn't, stretching toward things that aren't there. It's as if, after the glance, the predator leaves a tether, something unseen that still follows, like a leash between realms. These infected individuals, these marked, often find themselves drawn to sacred locations, performing rituals with no memory of having learned them. Some even self-terminate in elaborate patterns that match cult iconography found thousands of light years away. How does that happen? There's a story that stuck with me. A sanctioned psyker stationed aboard a black ship went missing for 3 days. When they found her, she was inside a cargo hold alone, her body covered in intricate knife wounds, none of them fatal. She'd carved coordinates into her own skin. They led to a derelict Imperial station in deep space, long abandoned. When a retrieval team investigated, they found a shrine. Not to the Emperor, not to Chaos, but to the Great Maw above. And in the center, a single knife stabbed into the floor, cold to the touch, humming faintly. That's how they connect. Through silence, through blood, through shared purpose twisted into psychic frequency. They don't ask their god for anything. They don't even call it a god. They invite it. And when it responds, it doesn't speak. It devours. What disturbs me most is that this isn't just blind devotion. It's ritualized, engineered, perfected over millennia by people who have studied the warp like a hunter studies its prey. And if they're right, if attention is all it takes to bridge realities, then how many glances does it take before something bigger than a whisper slips through? And what happens when the predator stops watching from afar and steps fully into the fold? There's a reason the cults of the Astral Knives terrify even the most battle-hardened inquisitors. It's not just the warp entities they call or the rituals they perform. It's where they thrive. These aren't fringe worshippers hiding in backwater wastelands or chaos-touched frontier moons. These cults spread in the hearts of Imperial civilization, on shrine worlds, within cathedral cities, deep inside the vaults of the ecclesiarchy. They are a cancer growing inside the sacred body of the Imperium, wearing its symbols, speaking its prayers, and twisting everything from within. I remember when I first heard rumors of a high-ranking confessor who vanished during a pilgrimage to Ophelia Sevenin. He was supposed to give a sermon to millions, yet he was never seen again. What they didn't release to the public was that his private sanctum was found covered in blood, the walls etched with knife-marked star maps no one could decipher. His robes were folded neatly on the altar, and in their place was a simple shard of obsidian shaped into a curved blade. There was no body, just the scent of incense, blood, and something cold that made the servo skulls shut down without warning. That's what makes the cult so dangerous. They don't present as enemies. They don't riot. They don't declare war. They infiltrate. They assimilate. They serve. You'll find them tending shrines, administering last rites, even delivering sermons that bring tears to the eyes of the faithful. But behind that, piety is a hollow devotion, one that belongs not to the Emperor, but to the predator in the dark. And when the time comes, they flip the blade inward and offer everything they've built as a beacon to the thing they worship. There have been entire planetary ministries infected without detection. Think about that. Entire administrative structures quietly subverted. Edicts passed that slowly reshape the local liturgy, a subtle shift in hymn phrasing. A new feast day that no one remembers being part of the imperial calendar. Statues of the Emperor with ever so slightly altered features, a missing eye, a blade clutched in the wrong hand. At first glance, it all looks legitimate, but once the cult takes root, it spreads fast. Some shrine worlds, once bastions of ecclesiarchal power, now bear a deeper rot. Pilgrims arrive in the millions to pray and leave changed. Not visibly, not at first, but they begin to dream. They start carving symbols in their sleep. Some stop speaking altogether, claiming that words disturb the gaze. Others simply vanish, drawn to hidden tunnels beneath the holy sites. There are reports of entire pilgrimage convoys disappearing into the void, last transmissions garbled with soft humming, and the sound of knives tapping rhythmically against metal bulkheads. And what truly shakes me is that the ecclesiarchy knows. They must. You can't have entire shrine sectors corrupted without someone noticing. But they stay quiet. Maybe it's shame. Maybe it's fear. Or maybe, just maybe, some of their higher members have already been taken. I've seen preachers with knives hidden beneath their rosaries. I've heard sermons where the phrase, "His light shall burn the darkness," is replaced with, "His edge shall sever the veil." And when questioned, they claim it's a dialectal variation from some obscure system. But you hear it enough times across different sectors, and you start to wonder how many dialects are really out there. Or how many are just masks. It doesn't stop at the clergy. The Inquisition itself isn't immune. There are whispered stories of Ordo Hereticus agents vanishing during interrogations, of entire retinues lost after raiding suspected cult sites. No trace, no remains, just void black knives left in a perfect ring. There's even speculation that an entire Ordo Malleus conclave was compromised after using warp beacon resonance techniques stolen from the cult to track demonic anomalies. They tried to turn the Predator's frequency into a weapon, and the Predator listened back. That's the thing. The more you study the Astral knives, the more you realize they don't resist Imperial structures. They nest inside them. They become part of the system. They don't burn the shrine. They light a different flame on its altar. And that's why purging them is nearly impossible. You'd have to burn down the very heart of the Imperium to be sure they're gone. And even then, who's to say they didn't light a smaller flame somewhere else, waiting to rise again? The psychological toll on those who've confronted the cult is brutal. I've spoken with scribes, clerics, even an inquisitor who survived a glance during a failed raid. They don't talk like survivors. They talk like witnesses, like people who've seen something they can't unsee. One scribe wept openly when I asked him what the cult wanted. "They don't want anything," he said. "That's why they win. They don't ask. They only open." He slit his own throat 2 days later. It would be easier if this was just another chaos cult, something with horns and fire and madness. But it isn't. The Astral knives are precise, quiet. They don't rage against the Imperium. They dwell inside it, in its cathedrals and courts, in its hymns and prayers. They don't scream to be heard. They whisper and wait. And while we argue over whether they exist at all, they're still cutting, still feeding, still watching. The Inquisition doesn't take whispers lightly. And when those whispers are drenched in blood, wrapped in the skin of priests, and echoing across shrine worlds once considered untouchable, it acts. There have been dozens, maybe hundreds, of inquisitorial purges tied to the Astral knives. You won't find most of them in sanctioned archives. What little survives exists in fragmented field reports, redacted transcripts, and the haunted eyes of those who came back. One of the most infamous cases was the purging of Dolorax Magna, a shrine world in Segmentum Obscurus. On the surface, everything looked pious. Endless processions, incense thick in the air, preachers reciting prayers in perfect high Gothic. But beneath the cathedrals, in a network of ossuaries long thought sealed, the knives had nested. They'd been there for decades, maybe centuries. The priests were cultists. The relics had been repurposed, bones arranged into glyphs, blood drained into star-shaped cisterns. When the Inquisition arrived, led by Ordo Hereticus Inquisitor Vial, they thought it would be a surgical purge. Identify, extract, cleanse. Instead, they walked into a ritual already in motion. Vial's final transmission was short. 3 words: "It's already opened." What followed was a full planetary exterminatus, bombardment, firestorms, a world rendered ash to prevent whatever presence had touched down from spreading further. Yet even then, months later, a listening station picked up a signal from the void where Dolorax once spun. A single monotone hum, identical to the harmonic resonance recorded in known astral knife rites. That's the core of the nightmare. You can burn the world, glass the cities, tear every cathedral down to rubble, and still, somehow, the cult persists on another planet, in another system, with the same rites, the same blades. It's like trying to kill smoke with a sword. Some Inquisitors have theorized that the Astral Knives don't function as a single cult, but as a mycelial network, decentralized but psychically linked. A mental fungus growing across the warp, seeding consciousness where the veil is thin. Others go further and suggest that the cult isn't a collection of individuals at all, but a single predator's dream, manifested through human minds. That every worshipper is just a nerve ending, a twitch in a larger body, reacting to some incomprehensible hunger. There was another case, the cleansing of Station Angelus, a deep space void platform orbiting a dying star. The Inquisition had received reports of heretical scripture being transmitted in machine code embedded within astropathic messages. An Ordo Malleus strike force boarded the station, expecting rogue tech priests. What they found was a temple carved into the station's lower decks, knives arranged in a perfect spiral, their hilts buried into the heart of the cogitator core. No living beings were found, only recordings of the station's crew performing coordinated acts of self-sacrifice over a period of 30 nights. Each death synced to a different phase of the star's collapse. The Inquisitor ordered the station destroyed. But weeks later, identical machine code surfaced again, this time in the prayers of a missionary vessel on the far side of the segmentum. The same words, the same symbols, and yet, despite all this, despite the exterminatus orders and the black site incinerations, the Astral Knives remain. It's like they know, like they expect the cleansing. Some even say the purges are part of the ritual, that every death, every burning, every soul torn apart in the Emperor's name is another sacrifice offered up to the Predator. Not resistance, but fuel. A mirror held up to Imperial wrath, and behind that mirror, something feeding. You'd think by now the Inquisition would have developed countermeasures. And they have, to a degree. Psychic dampening fields, ritual disruption squads, even experimental null psychers bred specifically to interrupt the collective trance states the cult uses to summon attention. But all of it is reactive. They're always one step behind, because the knives don't fight in straight lines. They don't broadcast their intentions. They just appear, cut, and disappear again. There are stories, unconfirmed of course, that some Inquisitors have turned. That prolonged exposure to the rituals, to the hums, to the glance, erodes loyalty. These aren't weak-minded acolytes we're talking about. These are veterans of demonic wars, psychers who've stared into the eye of terror and lived. And still, some vanish. Some stop responding to orders. Some leave behind nothing but their rosettes and a single blade etched with coordinates no one recognizes. I think what terrifies me most is the idea that you can't ever be sure you've won. You can storm the fortress, cleanse the planet, burn the books. But how do you destroy a thought that isn't being spoken, only felt? How do you silence a god that doesn't speak, only watches? How do you defeat a predator that only needs one open soul to enter the world again? And if every purge, every righteous fire is just another echo in the warp, are we fighting the cult or feeding it? There's a natural impulse among most Imperial scholars, and even Inquisitors, to shove anything warp-related into the same four corners: Khorne, Nurgle, Slaanesh, or Tzeentch. The ruinous powers are, after all, the most visible expressions of warp corruption. They have names, cults, armies. But the more I've studied the Astral Knives, the more convinced I've become that what they worship isn't chaos, not in the way we usually understand it. The thing, or things, they revere don't fit, not in shape, not in desire, not in behavior. If the warp is an ocean, then the chaos gods are towering storms. But what the knives are tapping into feels more like what's hiding beneath the surface. Take the behavioral patterns, for example. The four gods are driven by emotion, pure and concentrated. Khorne thrives on rage and bloodlust. Tzeentch feeds on ambition and change. Slaanesh drowns in sensation. Nurgle blossoms in decay and despair. All of them are mirrors to sentient emotion and thought. But the predators venerated by the Astral Knives don't respond to emotion. They aren't drawn by hate or pleasure or excess. They're drawn by stillness, by focus, by sacrifice performed in silence. That alone should be a red flag. It suggests they're not shaped by mortals in the same way the dark gods are. They're older, more elemental. There's a term some fringe xenotheologists use, protochaos. The idea that before the current pantheon of the ruinous powers rose from the collective psychic detritus of sentient life, there were other entities, primordial, formless, and vast. Not gods, not even predators in the way we understand them. More like instinct given shape. The warp wasn't always infected by emotion. It once simply was. A place of reflection, maybe, or recursion. The Astral Knives, according to this theory, have somehow reconnected to that pre-echo state. They've bypassed the emotional pantheon entirely and made contact with something that predates sin, virtue, and ideology alike. And I'll be honest, there's evidence for this, scattered though it is. In Necron ruins, there are accounts etched in impossible crystalline code of beings that swam through the unlight long before the Old Ones sculpted the first warp-sensitive species. Not gods, not monsters, just hungers that pass through reality without shape or purpose until something, someone, fed them. Some say the Old Ones locked them away, others that they simply receded when the warp changed. But what if they never left? What if they just needed someone to remember them? There are also those who believe these entities aren't part of the warp at all, that they come from outside, from a region beyond the immaterium, beyond real space, a non-place, a null zone. Think of it like an immune response. If the warp is a living entity, maybe these things are parasites or antibodies, forces that don't care about our morality, our faith, our pain. They just cleanse, devour, reset. The Astral Knives then aren't summoning gods. They're opening doors, letting these outside forces in, not to rule, just to feed. Some theorists go even darker. They suggest the predators are the warp's forgotten children, left behind when the ruinous powers took shape. Not strong enough to become gods, not clever enough to become princes, but patient. They've been waiting in the cracks, watching their stronger siblings consume everything. And now they've found a new way to survive. Through ritual, through faith stripped of ego, through cults like the Astral Knives that don't worship them as rulers, but submit to them as prey. It's a new kind of devotion, not transactional, sacrificial, and horrifyingly effective. What reinforces these ideas are the psychic signatures. Demons aligned to chaos gods leave traces, heat, emotion, color. But the entities that come when the knives perform their rites, they leave voids, null zones, places where auspexes fail, where no light reflects, where no thoughts echo. I read one report from a rogue psyker who tried to read the soul of a marked follower. He said it was like staring into a tunnel that kept stretching forever, no end, no edge. And somewhere in the distance, something breathing, slow, steady, unchanging. That's not how the gods of chaos work. They're explosive, tumultuous. These things, they wait. And when you look at them, they don't speak. They just look back. No offers, no temptations, only the quiet certainty that you are seen and not needed. And maybe that's the most terrifying part of all. With chaos, there's at least the illusion of relationship. You can bargain, resist, defy. But with the predators of the Astral Knives, there is no struggle, no war, only the blade, only the moment of opening. And beyond that, nothing. So no, this isn't Khorne. It's not Tzeentch. It's not even some obscure demon cloaked in forgotten sigils. It's something else. Something older. Something that was never meant to be part of our universe, but is now being invited in by those too broken, too devoted, or too curious to resist. And if that door opens wide enough, we may all learn what it's like to be hunted by something that doesn't care if we scream. There's something about the knives themselves that makes the cult of the Astral knives feel less like a metaphor and more like a horrifying truth. I mean, it's easy to assume the knife is just a symbol. Devotion, sacrifice, submission, all that. But once you start digging into the few surviving artifacts, the few fragments pulled from the aftermath of failed rituals or purged cult cells, that illusion starts to fall apart. Because these things aren't symbolic. They're real, and they are not like any blade made by human hands. I once saw one, or what remained of one. It was locked behind 6 stasis fields in a forbidden chamber on an Adeptus Mechanicus outpost in the Adrantis Vale. I wasn't supposed to be there. I was just assisting Amagos with the data extraction, but curiosity got the better of me. It looked simple at first, about the size of a standard combat dagger, jet black, no markings. But the moment I got close, I felt it. Not a presence, more like absence, like sound being swallowed, light being dulled. The Magos later told me its edge hadn't dulled in over 2,000 years. No sharpening, no corrosion, no decay. And the really disturbing part? They couldn't determine what it was made of. Not metal, not ceramic, not bone, just something. Something that shouldn't exist in real space. There are a few recovered blades referenced in the data coffers of the Lathe worlds. Most are labeled under categories like Xenos Material Suspected or Anomalous Warp Reactive Substrate. One was allegedly found embedded in a temple pillar on a remote forge moon. It had cut straight through plasteel, ferrocrete, and 2 layers of void-shielded stone without resistance. When extracted, the area around the blade was found to be slightly off on the spatial spectrum, as if it had partially phased into another dimensional layer. It took 6 tech priests and a full choir of calibrated electro prayers just to stabilize the thing long enough to contain it. That same report noted the oddest detail. The blade hummed, not audibly, but on a level that resonated with the souls of nearby psychers. One went catatonic. Another carved a map into his own chest before collapsing. When asked what he was drawing, he said it was the path the knife showed him. He died before anyone could question further. And this is where the fan theories start running wild. One common belief is that these knives are not forged at all. They're not created in any traditional sense. They're grown, or formed maybe in the warp itself. Crystallized bits of the Predator's will, or fragments of a larger consciousness compacted into a physical shape. That would explain why they all share that strange inward curve, like a fang folding toward the throat. It's not a design, it's an expression, a shape these predators prefer, a form that echoes their nature, sharp, inevitable, intimate. Some theorists believe the knives act as anchors, allowing the predators to extend a part of themselves into real space. Not fully, not yet, but enough to watch, to influence. The act of carrying one is thought to blur the line between self and offering. That's why so many cultists carry their blades at all times, even when asleep. It's not about protection, it's about devotion. The blade isn't a tool, it's a covenant. The more fringe interpretations suggest that these knives can cut not just flesh, but concepts. That when used in ritual, they don't just wound the body, they slice identity, memory, even fate. One report from a now erased inquisitorial file described a knife recovered from a sacrificial site on a mining world. The victim had been cut once across the chest, not deeply, but afterward, no one could remember who he had been. His name, his records, his family, all gone, as if he'd been cut out of history. The knife was inscribed with a single word in a language no machine could translate. The only approximation anyone could agree on was erase. But maybe the most chilling idea I've come across is the one whispered by some of the more radical elements in the Ordo Malleus, that these knives aren't just used for sacrifice, they're invitations, keys. When driven into a willing heart, they don't kill, they open, And what steps through, what watches from the other side, is the predator itself. Or at least a fragment of it. That every blade is a doorway, and every cultist who falls on one isn't dying in worship, but becoming a conduit. It would explain why the blades never corrode. Why they hum. Why they sometimes appear even after exterminatus, lying in the ash of ruined temples, untouched by flame or gravity. They're not artifacts. They're seeds, waiting for the right hands, the right moment, the right silence. So when people ask me if the knives are real, if they're truly dangerous, I don't even know how to answer anymore. Because I think we've been asking the wrong question. It's not about whether the knives are weapons or symbols. It's whether they belong here at all. Whether they're intrusions. Cracks in reality where something else is peering through. And if that's true, then every recovered knife isn't just evidence. It's a warning. A whisper. A piece of the predator already inside the Imperium's skin. It's one thing to talk about the cults of the Astral knives in theory. Whispers, rituals, knives that hum in the dark. But the real horror starts when you look into the events where the cult didn't just worship something. They invited it, and it came. There are incidents scattered across forbidden records, barely legible through redactions, marked as hoaxes, psychic anomalies, or unverified demonological activity. But they all follow the same pattern. A ritual, a silence, a disappearance, and a wound left in real space that never fully heals. Take the Sibilant Drop incident. It's one of those names you won't find in any official archive unless you know exactly what you're looking for, and even then it'll be buried under a dozen code names and false flags. Sibilant Drop was a mid-tier agri-moon in the Glavier subsector, no military value, barely habitable. But it had a massive shrine complex dedicated to Saint Arabane, and it drew tens of thousands of pilgrims a year. 1 week, every single transmission from the moon stopped. Astropathic silence. No mechanical errors, no warp storms, just nothing. When a monitoring frigate arrived to investigate, the moon was still in orbit, perfectly intact. But when they tried to land, the surface didn't respond. No signals, no energy patterns. It was like the entire planetary infrastructure had gone dormant. A second team was sent in, equipped with hardened auspexes and VoxLink relays. They landed. The last thing they transmitted was a visual feed showing a wide plain littered with bodies, each arranged in spiraling formations. At the center of the spiral, a black obelisk covered in knives pointed skyward. Then the feed cut. The moon vanished from orbit less than an hour later. Literally vanished. Not destroyed, not imploded. Just gone. No debris, no gravitational echo, no warp signature. Just a void. You talk to old voidfarers and psychers who've been in that region, and they'll tell you the same thing. Steer clear of where Sibilant Drop used to be, because you'll feel it. They say your dreams change, your thoughts loop, and sometimes, if you're very quiet, you'll hear blades clinking together just outside your mind. Then there's the Orphid Halo event. This one's more recent and even harder to dismiss. A small listening post stationed near a dying binary star system picked up a burst of encoded prayer signals, astral knife iconography embedded in hymn structure. At the same moment, the main star of the system dimmed by almost 60%, then flared violently with no predicted cause. When the Mechanicus dispatched a solar probe, the data it returned was incomprehensible. Gravitational fields inside the corona, static echoes of a voice humming just below the electromagnetic threshold. It wasn't language. It wasn't even warp-based, but it repeated a pattern every 13 seconds, something akin to a heartbeat. The cult was there, or had been. A small station on one of the outer planets showed remnants of ritual structures, perfectly preserved, knives driven into the walls, blood in frozen pools that never evaporated despite the vacuum breach. The survivors, if you could call them that, were found on a lifeboat adrift nearby, all of them blind, all of them mute, and all of them smiling. But the worst case I ever came across was the Venacar breach, a populated hive world, One of those vertical nightmares where faith is the only thing holding back complete collapse. The lower levels had long been declared uninhabitable due to warp sepsis, but in truth, the astral knives had carved out a labyrinthine network of sanctums deep in the dark. Over decades, they built a pattern, thousands of micro-rituals, sacrifices measured not in bodies but in ideas. Names erased, histories unwritten, memory offered to the silence. Then one day, something opened. Not a portal, not a warp rift, a hole. A region in the center of the hive spire where gravity reversed, time slowed, and light bent inward. It wasn't an attack. It wasn't chaos. It was stillness, like reality had stopped breathing. The Inquisition sealed the entire planet, called for exterminatus, but the order was delayed by bureaucratic entanglements. By the time the cyclonic torpedo hit, the hive was gone. Not collapsed. Gone. The detonation struck only empty stone. No signs of life, no wreckage, only a crater and a knife hovering 3 feet above it, spinning slowly in place. The implications are horrifying. If the cult's rituals are indeed successful, if these predators can step into real space even partially, then we're not dealing with religious madness anymore. We're talking about an invasive metaphysical species, something that doesn't just enter the world, it rewrites it. Consumes not just matter, but structure. And the more successful these rituals become, the more reality starts to break at the seams. There's a story, passed from void ship to void ship, about an Imperial cruiser that picked up a life pod from a derelict pilgrim barge. The pod was ancient, hundreds of years old, and shouldn't have survived. Inside was a girl, young, barely 15. Perfect health. No memory of who she was, but she had a black blade sewn into her chest cavity, pulsing softly. The ship was quarantined. The girl vanished, no records, no orders, just gone. Some say she was an avatar. Others say she was the Predator, wearing a human face. But everyone agrees on one thing. She smiled the whole time. So when people scoff at the astral knives and call them just another fringe cult, I point to these cases, these anomalies, these scars in reality that no doctrine, no catechism, no psychic theory can explain. Because the truth is, the predators they worship aren't content to stay in the warp, and every successful ritual is a door. Every door opens wider, and sooner or later, one of those doors won't close. After all the cults I've studied, all the heresies I've chased down rabbit holes across this godforsaken galaxy, nothing has unsettled me quite like the astral knives. It's not just the rituals or the eerie synchronicity of their members, or even the predators they venerate. It's the absence, the gaps, the silences that feel heavier than screams. The way they erase, not just lives, but meaning. With chaos, at least, you understand the stakes. You can predict the madness. Khorne wants blood. Tzeentch wants manipulation. Slaanesh hungers for excess. Nurgle festers with decay. Their followers, for all their monstrosity, are still human. Still driven by emotion, ego, desire. But the astral knives? They want to stop being human. They want to be devoured. And what kind of predator is it that doesn't seduce, doesn't lure, doesn't promise, only watches, waits, and comes when you're silent enough to hear your own thoughts dissolve? That's what makes them terrifying. They're not trying to conquer the Imperium. They're not trying to replace the ecclesiarchy. They're not spreading corruption in the name of power. They don't want anything from us. They just want to cut, to prepare the offering, to open the way. They move through the galaxy like a scalpel through scar tissue, precise and without malice. And when they're done, you're not twisted. You're not reborn. You're gone, erased so thoroughly, even the warp might not remember your name. And the worst part? It works. Somehow, some way, it works. We've seen it. Planets vanish. People disappear without a trace. Cults reappear centuries later, using the same symbols, the same structure, the same unspoken liturgy, like no time has passed at all. You can't kill something that doesn't resist. You can't fight a mind that's already decided it doesn't want to exist anymore. Some people argue that they're just another variant chaos cult, that the predators are demons in different masks, that the knives are just relics of some lost chaos warband. But when you see what they do, when you listen to the recordings, when you feel that silence settle in a place that's already dead, you know better. This isn't mutation. This isn't chaos. This is something else, something deeper, something that lies beneath the bedrock of the warp itself. I think that's why so many Inquisitors go missing when they dig too deep. Not because they're corrupted, not because they turn, but because they begin to understand. And once you understand, once that quiet little truth carves itself into the back of your mind, you can't look away. You start listening for the silence between thoughts. You start feeling the shape of the knife pressing against the inside of your chest. You start dreaming of stars that don't belong to any chart arranged in spirals no telescope can confirm. I've stared into their archives. I've read the confessions etched in bone. I've heard the humming on audio logs captured from the edge of a warp breach. And I've come to believe that the astral knives are more than a cult. They're a symptom, a whisper of something moving behind the veil, patient and unblinking, wearing humanity like a mask until the last prayer is spoken and the last knife falls. So yeah, this one sticks with me. Not because it's flashy or violent or spectacular, but because it's quiet. Because the fear comes later, when you're lying awake at night, wondering why your shadow doesn't match your body, or why you suddenly can't remember your brother's voice, or why the stars out your window seem to be turning. Thanks for diving into this abyss with me. If this kind of deep dive into the darkest corners of the Imperium speaks to you, if you want more investigations into the forgotten cults, unspoken horrors, and ancient predators that even the Chaos Gods fear, then go ahead and subscribe. Share your thoughts in the comments. Maybe you've heard rumors of other nameless worshippers, or seen signs that the astral knives have passed through your world. And if you haven't, just listen a little longer. Sometimes silence isn't empty. Sometimes it's waiting for you to notice it.